Okay, so now we're going to look at some different kinds of surface textures that you can do. So I was doing this little noodle here, and I decided to just keep going with this leftover combination of warp and weft thread that I had and do some knots. And so there are all kinds of ways you can do knots on the surface. I think one of the easiest ways is to go into a neutral shed, and from a neutral shed I'm just tying a half hitch around every single warp thread, but I'm reversing every time I do it. So I'll slow that down. On this one I'm going behind from my left. On the next one I'm going to go behind from my right. And what that does is that's kind of confusing the direction that the knots are going and making this surface texture with the white added in just a little bit more confused and interesting. It would be more of a braid kind of a thing if I went straight up. So I did that just with some leftovers, really easy way. And if you wanted to take an existing color, I've got this green going on over here. Let's say I wanted to do something similar where I add a color to the green. I'll do it with a white thread. This happens to be warp thread again. All I did is loop that around a warp thread, and I'm going to tie my first knot onto that thread where I started the loop. And now I can just continue knotting with this thread added in. Now let's say I am tired of this white, so I'm just going to grab my scissors, snip it off. I'll throw it out of the back and deal with it later. Let's say I want to add yellow instead, so I'm going to get a little bit of yellow yarn. On all of this surface stuff, you can defy the rules. I'm putting the yellow behind a warp thread. You can defy the rules of how many thicknesses of thread or yarn you can work with at one time. If I were just weaving this, there's no way I could work with 3 thicknesses of my yarn. It would make the tapestry look awful. I have lice all over the place. But when I'm doing a few knots, it works just fine. One of the other great things about knotting as a surface texture is it neutralizes your shed. Because you're going around, fully around every single warp thread, if you had any problems with mixed sheds, it just solves those. For the purposes of the Tempestry project, since this video is being recorded for Tempestry, keep in mind you can add colors or elements or types of thread. You just can't take any away. So if you wanted to add some white thread or some different colors, you're welcome to do that. You could also use, where I've got this yellow and green, that could be the colors from 2 different days that you bring in simultaneously by doing these surface knots. The next thing I'm going to show you as far as surface texture is sumac, and this is one of the easiest ones to do. So you can go left to right or right to left, it doesn't really matter. The best way to start sumac and not get confused is to randomly go in about 3 or 4 warp threads and tie a knot around that warp thread. So I'll do it from the front so you can see. I'm just going to tie a knot around this warp thread. And then I'm going to carry my bobbin behind. And now I've got it anchored in the back so I can just start. So sumac goes, if I'm going left to right, normally I'd come in from this side. Sumac goes over, around, so past where you're coming out and around, then I go over one more warp thread. So another way to think about it is I'm going over 2 and then back through the middle of those 2. Over 2 and back through the middle. Or if you want to just think of it this way, it's an overhand sweep around every single warp thread. But wait, there's more. You don't have to do it just around one warp thread. So if I got really excited about my sumac here, I could say, well, shoot, I want to make it bigger passes. So I could go around, say 4 at a time, and make that float longer, which creates an entirely different pattern than just going around one. You'll notice how easily the sumac filled in that curve and this angle. Sumac is the ideal thing to use when you've got an irregular fell line. The fell line is the horizontal line across your work. So if you've got some irregular bumps and curves and angles that you need to cover, sumac is an excellent way to do it. The other fun thing about sumac is if you get sumac going in two different directions, and let's see, I think I'll just go through so I can show this a little more easily. So if I've come across, I'll show you just on the edge here. If I've come across in sumac one direction, so I'm going left to right, and this is the version over every other, or every warp thread, every single warp thread. So I'm reaching overhand and coming back, overhand and coming back. So I'm going past that warp thread, underneath it, and back toward the direction I came. Now, if I reverse that at any point, what'll happen is you get a surface braid that is really just like a lovely little touch. And you notice on this version that I didn't go all the way across. I just created this little braided ridge right there, and I like it right there, and I don't have to go anyplace else with it. Just tuck my end to the back, and there's sumac. The last thing I want to show you is for anybody who does any kind of pattern weaving, like on a 4 or 8 shaft loom, this is something you can do with that. Actually, I'll show you 2 more things. So if you want to do some patterns like twills, which are just created out of floats or something similar, how you would do that is you use a pickup stick. You're always going to need to go underneath the selvage thread, and then I'm using the pickup stick to press down 3, pick up 1, down 3, pick up 1, down 3, pick up 1. And then I'm going to put my bobbin through just that place where I've done that. Now on the next pass, if I take that same pattern and I move it over 1 thread, and so by moving it over 1 thread, what I'm going to do is I'm going to pick up 2 and then go down 3 under 1. So I'm just starting 1 more thread over than I did last time. Now when I go through, those floats have moved over 1 more. You'll be able to see this a little bit better when we get 1 more version of it going. So now that's going to be my pickup right there. You can see I'm finding it. There's the exposed warp thread. So I pick up the next one over and then follow my pattern of down 3, up 1, down 3, up 1, down 3, up 1. Bring the thread across. And you can see this really nice pattern that's starting to develop where just every time you go through, that's 1 more over. So this time it'll be there, so I go there too, there, there, and I'm just going 1 to the left. I'm moving to the left of the same ones I picked up last time. And this edge right along in here gets this really lovely wave pattern in it. You can also do these kind of floats somewhat randomly, but that really nice structure is really kind of fun. Okay, last thing I'm going to show you as far as texture, and I picked this kind of crunchy yarn to do this, is how to do loops. So, whichever shed you happen to be in, and of course I've been messing around so I don't have clean sheds, but whichever shed you happen to be in, what you're going to do is go across, and then you're going to take, you can do this with a bobbin or a double pointed needle or pencil. I'm just going to give myself a little bit better tail there. I'm going to take this pencil, and I just picked up this thread between the 2 warps, and I go and pick up another thread between the 2 warps, and you can see why I gave myself a little bit more of a tail to do this with. Okay, let's do 1 more. So I'm just diving into that gap between the warps. Now I'm going to leave my little object, my pencil or my double pointed needle or whatever it was that I did that with. I'm going to leave it in there for a little bit, and I'm going to keep weaving. There are lots of other ways to do surface loops. This is, I think, one of the easiest, most secure, and least fussy ways to get very, very regular loops. So there we go. And I'm kind of doubling up on the texture by using this crunchy flag thread. Now, after I've done a little bit, I just pull my little space holder for those loops out, and voila, you have little loops. Last thing, actually no, I think that's it. We got our little wave pattern there. We got our surface loops. We got these guys. We got the knots. I believe that is what you need to know about Surface Texture 101.